We're doing an Ask Me Anything event with University of Alabama. Tonight we have John Estes and Taylor Brorby. And I think some of you might be familiar with University of Alabama or might have joined the first Q&A that we did, since this is part 2. But you're welcome to throw questions in the chat and we'll ask them as we go. Some of you have asked questions beforehand that we didn't get to last time, so we're hoping that we'll get to answer them this time. So University of Alabama is the home of the Black Warrior Review. It's also among the oldest writing programs in the U.S. They offer workshops in fiction, poetry, and creative nonfiction. John Estes directs the creative writing program at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. Previous books include Kingdom Come, out with C&R Press, Sure Extinction with Elixir Press, which won the Anti-Venom Poetry Prize, with 2 books forthcoming from Apocryphal Press, a volume of poetry and a collection of short fiction. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Svetlana.
And we have Taylor Brorby. Taylor is the author of Boys in Oil, Growing Up Gay in a Fractured Land, New York Times Editor's Choice book, Crude, Poems, Coming Alive, Action and Civil Disobedience, and he is a co-editor of Fracture, Essays, Poems, and Stories on Fracking in America. Taylor's work has appeared in New York Times, Huffington Post, The Nation, and other journals and numerous anthologies. He's the contributing editor at North American Review and serves on the editorial boards of Terrain and Hub City Press. In 2026, he'll be the Rachel Carson Distinguished Fellow at Chatham University. Welcome to them.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we'll start with a couple questions that were sent in, and then as questions come in, I'll just make a note of them and we'll bounce back and forth. So first, we'll start with some general MFA related questions. And the first one, which I think is really interesting, is MFA a safety net?
You want to start, Taylor?
I will, sure. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with a safety net if I'm interpreting the question right. I mean, paid time to write, it's what most of us are after in a supportive and challenging environment that exposes you to new forms, new ideas. You're in classes with interesting people who think things like sonnets or short stories are worth their time, which we definitely believe they are. And it's also, if not a break from the wider culture, maybe even a more intense period of time of learning how to pay attention to hear how the sonic quality of sentences sound in your paragraphs or in your stories or in your essays. And to be in that environment can be thrilling. It can also push you up against the limits of what you think you can do. So I think when I think of a safety net, it's definitely a safe environment to challenge yourself. I also think it's one of the few outlets we have in American culture to really delve deeply into a state of mind to see what art you produce in that context. So I don't view it as a negative thing. I mean, my God, I wish I was still in a fully funded, and where I could roll around and have deadlines and meet interesting people.
I love that. What do you think, John?
I'd be interested in, I wish the asker of the question was here. I'd be curious to know what context or what the subtext of the question is. Because, there's that old saying about that artists work without a net. That's what I think of immediately. And part of what an MFA does, like any degree, when you choose a major or you take anybody who applies and goes through an MFA is taking a leap of faith. You're quitting whatever life you have and heading off to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, or wherever. It's an unknown, and yes, you have funding, so there's a safety net that way. It's it's no one's getting rich, but you have a job, you have a place, and you have some people who are going to help you. But the reason you're doing it is to, maybe it's intuitive and maybe it's unconscious for a lot of people, is you are seeking an identity. And what happens in the course of an MFA, ideally, is you develop and strengthen that identity as an artist, as a teacher, and you just grow up, and you're growing up in this culture. And as insofar as it's working in that part of us that wants to make art, it is teaching us how to work without a net, to take risks, to know that nobody cares about whether you ever write another poem or story or essay, but you're going to do it anyway. And then you're going to send it out and get rejected and all the things that as writers we have to do, no matter what job you go on to get, because of course most people, and in that regard, the kind of second interpretation I have of that question is that a master's degree, any master's degree, is a fantastic degree to have because it increases your worth on the job market, no matter what it is you're going to do. And in that regard, whether it's a 2-year MA here or a 3-year MFA there, nobody mostly cares what your master's degree is in, but you have one. And that's going to serve you well, increase your the range of possibilities for you and probably the pay you get at whatever job you do. But even within that life you make, that artist part is going to still have, it's going to be more developed. You're going to have confidence, and uh, with any luck, you'll stay on the track.
Yeah.
Becoming a writer, no matter what path it takes.
Yeah, that's such great insight. And I think, with the changing economy, any sense of safety you can have is probably a great thing to give yourself. So, um, what advice would you give to someone who's applying for an MFA that's coming from a non-writing background?
I will say I am completely biased for people who are not coming from a writing background, particularly those amongst us who've studied the sciences. For instance, many of my, for instance, best undergrad students tend to come from the sciences. I mean, here at the University of Alabama, we have a shrine in the Alabama Museum of Natural History to E.O. Wilson, Ed Wilson, who was one of the world's famous ant experts and won the Pulitzer Prize twice. He didn't have an MFA, but he knew how to convey information, tell a good story. And so I wouldn't be so obsessed with thinking you have some lack or something's lacking in your application. What we, at least at Alabama, care about is your writing. And writing traverses any sort of subject that you've studied. You might have been out of school for a decade or 2 decades and thinking now's the time to go back, like Kent Harif, and go back in your late 30s to get an MFA. And I would be more obsessed if I were an applicant of not thinking, am I schooled in literature? I'd be more obsessed with, am I schooled in sentences and know how they work and how to signal, as Emerson would say, an interesting mind on the page. We're looking for interesting, kind, supportive people to come and study and work in community. And I think that's, for me, as a person who reads applications, more what I'm obsessed with rather than did you study creative writing in college or English? In fact, I might be more against you. Speaking as someone who only has degrees in literature and writing, I mean, if you study anthropology, that's incredible. You probably know how to do research outside of yourself rather than, excuse me, if you've been studying creative writing throughout your undergrad degree, that I also think as someone who specializes in nonfiction, I don't only want to read memoir style writing. I want you to be nimble and ambidextrous.
Another kind of pleasingly ambiguous question, because if by writing background, I assume that you're writing because you're applying for an MFA, but if that means coming from from a creative writing, the creative writing culture, I would echo what Taylor is saying. And I think maybe I said something like this the last time, but you know, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when you wanted to be a writer, the thing you did is you went to New York or you went to Paris, or you just went out and you lived. Even when I, coming up in the 80s, I suppose, there was still a sense, and we actually see this in the trope of the writer's bio, where the first sentence is all the odd jobs they had, before they made it. That the first imperative was to be an interesting person and go off and have experiences. And in that regard, I think I'm kind of disappointed sometimes in how my life has worked out, that I am a creature of this system. Whereas I know when I was 20, what I imagined was, well, I'm just going to write so many great books. The universities will come calling. It doesn't really work that way very often. But, I didn't go back to get my creative writing degree until I was 34. Like, I really tried to not do it before I just decided this was the professional path. So, assuming that you're writing and you're reading and working and getting better, I don't think it's, to get back to the question at hand, any disadvantage to having never taken a creative writing class, because the work will speak for itself.
Right.
And
There's a question in the chat. What if you've been published by literary journals, but you're a college dropout? Does that work against you?
well, the graduate school, not for me. I mean, I think being a rebel, I will often tell students, like, I admire you for not doing my assignments or for skipping class. Like, the last thing you should do as a writer is what people tell you to do. But uh, the graduate school will require you to have a BA degree in order to be admitted. So uh, that's the problem there. It's not from us,
Yeah.
and we've run into that problem sometimes, where we admit someone because we love their writing, and we haven't paid close enough attention to even like the GPA, because like the graduate school has certain GPA requirements, and then we had to go to the mat, which we will. So like, to say, well, we believe in this person and they've grown up since their undergraduate days, where they had a 2.75, and we feel that they're ready for graduate work.
That's
But
lovely to hear. That brings me to my next question. Who do you think MFA programs are right for, and who do you think won't benefit from the program?
Taylor, you take that one.
Yeah, my sense like I'll just even reframe it like, who do I want to work with? I want to work with like open-minded, curious people who are like fierce for the writing but kind in community. I'm not interested in working with divas and things like this. I think MFA programs are great when you believe you've brought your writing far enough along in your own way, and you need that extra inch of a boost. When my grad students turn their work, I say, all I probably have been doing more than you is failing at this longer and reading longer than you. So I'm not looking for this to be a finished, fully formed piece. I want as far as long as you can bring it. And then my job is just to be kind of your first reader and help you think through or get a reaction from it to try to boost it that extra inch to get you to the next revision, the next version, to get you excited about the work again. I'm not here to give you the gold star and say, "Oh, little Billy, you've made it." I don't know what that means. I'm still waiting for my MacArthur Genius Grant and stuff to fall from the heavens, but there'll still be books to write after that. And so I really privilege people who are curious, not cynics, not people who are smug. I want you to feel like this is a playground that you get a wonderful opportunity to grow in ways I don't think you often do in the day-to-day work-a-day life, or even in day-to-day college life. This is just a different beast, and more is expected, more is demanded, but I think the end product of that is, by the end of the MFA, you are a completely changed artist and in new and nimble ways. And those are some of the things that come to mind with that question for me.
And I like to remind people, like, there's an MFA mystique, and there's a certain romance to it. But once you're here, it's just school. and you're taking classes, and it just becomes normal life. And then, you have to deal with the fact that you're only making $18,000 and you've got all these demands on you, and you're in a community of, Alabama's a large program. We have almost 50 students. So it's a hothouse, of young people who are, there's pressure, there's anxiety, but there's also a lot of energy, and that's all good. But I would just return to, in addition to all the kind of known things, is just to remember that it's a credential, and it's an academic credential, and it's a good one to have. And so even people who get here, and there's always a period of disillusionment and adjustment. Uh, and there comes a point at which the objective is just to finish so you can move on. And that's all. It's all in the natural course of things. And I
Would you
think,
say, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
well, I just want to get back to that's kind of my preamble to answering the question, is that I think most people at some point, it may feel like a sacrifice, but most people will benefit from having a master's degree. And if you have the years to give, and you will, come in a community, you'll read and you'll study, and you'll have to, there's, you have to sit in a class and listen to teachers, which is also kind of annoying, especially once you feel like you're done with school. But that said, if your objective is to be a commercial writer, and that's where you want to put your focus, I'm not sure that an MFA is the best course for you, because you're going to have assignments. You're going to have, it's just, you might find that the life and the demands of it don't really allow you to, work on the books that you want to work on.
Mm.
And so if you as a writer have a sense of mission and an objective that is commercial, that's kind of at odds somewhat with the art school MFA culture. Not that we don't work in interesting ways with genre. We're all doing that, but we're also studying the literary tradition and trying, and it's not always strictly commercial. And so it might not be the best use of your time if you're trying to build a career as a writer in that regard. So but there's some trade-offs in there. Sorry, you have a follow-up question.
Yeah, well, no, that makes a lot of sense. I actually have a two-part question. So would you be more inclined to accept a student or a prospective student who is interested in developing their craft, and that's why they want to pursue an MFA, versus somebody who wants to teach at the university setting? And as a follow-up to that, what would make you turn away a strong candidate or a strong application?
I'm happy to start, John. I really think, I'm going to take the cheap way out of your two-part question of, I think teaching and craft are related. I mean, part of the benefit of going to an MFA program, especially one that allows you to teach, is you kind of get to hear yourself talk about your own artistic sensibility. And are you regurgitating cliches that you've heard in the creative writing classroom, or are you challenging those and subverting them? I I will say, for me, when I am looking at an application strictly, my obsession, I mean, I even teach a class here at UA called The Sentence, which maybe students will think they're serving a sentence that semester, but like, well written, work, how do those sentences work? Where does dialogue come in? And we drill down in those poems or novels or nonfiction books. And so I think for me as a teacher, the best thing I can give my students is an insurance policy in their sentences or in their lines of, I write poetry now somewhat on occasion, but I used to do it a lot more, though I read a lot of poetry. But I think that is really the thing I view my work as an educator here, is to help you demand more of your sentences, whatever that means, in whatever genre you're working in. Because it's like what Annie Dillard said in her 1989 essay, Write Till You Drop. The young painter comes up to the old master and says, "Well, master, do you think I could be a painter?" And he said, "I don't know. Are you obsessed with the smell of paint?" And it's kind of like the same thing with poets. Young poets, you ask them, "Oh, whose poetry do you like?" No one, no one, no one. They haven't learned, as she's saying, poets are obsessed with poetry. And so that's sort of where I'm at is, are you obsessed with sentences? I'm your guy, like come work with me. That's not going to be satisfying though all the time. If, like John said in the previous question, your mind is elsewhere. Um, to me on the application, we can't quite tell what type of teacher you're going to be, but we can definitely tell from your documents what type of craft person you are. And I would say universally in our program, care about the curation, the craft of what you've constructed to present yourself to us.
I would take some issue with the dichotomy that is set up in that question. At least at this level, your authority as a teacher and your skill as a teacher is grounded in your experience as a practitioner. Even teaching comp, you're not like, we're not giving lesson plans. It's not like in high school where there's a state curriculum that you're given. You are developing that class, and your ability to reverse engineer, which is essentially what's happening, to say, how did I learn to be a writer? How did I get here? What did I read? And in that kind of age old question of, can you teach anyone to write? One of the answers is, well, no, but you can save people time. And so one aspect of it is, well, what did I spend a year learning that maybe I can devise a classroom lesson that will like introduce the problem and get people thinking right away. And so I don't think you can develop as a teacher of writing if you're not also focused on writing. They go together. And I think that's the appeal of the life, even though it is, the path to the life isn't very, very clean or well lit, but the appeal for some of us who feel like our gift is as much teaching as writing, this career creates a synergy. I hate to use the word synergy, but it's a complementary pairing of activities that feed one another. But then we also have a number of people who come every year and get a taste of the classroom and realize this is not for me. And
Right.
I'm always happy when that happens because it's, and the tail end of that question, what would uh, I don't know, why would we turn down a strong application? I guess
Yeah.
I don't know that we would. It depends where the strength is. Um,
I mean, I think maybe we would say, John, wouldn't you agree that, just because you have a 4.0 doesn't ensure that you're getting into any creative writing I mean, I would ask, what do they mean by strong? If your statement of purpose is strong, your writing sample lights my ginger hair on fire, you seem like a hell of a good time. We're going to try to get you here, and uh, yeah, I can't. I don't think we would turn down a strong application, but that's probably person dependent what they mean by strong.
I
That's
guess
helpful.
one thing to be careful about, and this just back to the question that we spent a lot of time in the last chat talking about with the statement of purpose, is I guess I can think of some occasions where people have maybe inadvertently even revealed some immaturities in their statement of purpose that made us question what they would be, whether they would live well in a community. And every once in a while, here's an even easier one, is because I fit into this. I think when I first applied to the MFA, I think I fit into this category where I was somewhat disdainful of the whole enterprise, and
Mm.
Mhm.
so I think I felt like I was maybe a little bit above it, and I didn't want to subject myself to it. But okay, I'll do it. And so I think I'm sure I revealed in that, and thankfully I don't even have it anymore, so I never have to read it. But I'm sure that in that statement of purpose I wrote in my 20s, I probably came across as like an arrogant ass who was insufferable. And so why would anybody accept me? And they didn't. For that round, I did not get into any of the places I applied. And so some humility and some attempt at um, showing that you really want to come and be a full participant in the life of the program and that you're not just all about yourself goes a long way.
That's great. I wanted to get into some more of the nitty gritty about statement of purpose and the writing sample, because I think there's some people that have a lot of questions about those. But first, I just wanted to say that there was some love from a either current or former student, Tara Burrows, who said that she went to your MFA program and it was one of the best or the best decision that she ever made. So I just wanted to say that. Um,
Thank you, Tara.
Yeah, about to graduate.
So let's see. Let's talk about the statement of purpose because I think we're sort of on the topic of um, what makes a good candidate, how to make yourself stand out as a candidate. So how artsy should your statement of purpose be? Is this an opportunity for you to show what a good writer you are, or should you stick more to the resume style? This is where I come from. This is what I'm doing. This is what I want to do, and not be too um,
You'd see.
yeah, yeah.
What would you advise, John?
Well, I would say don't try to get too cute. I don't think the statement of purpose is I had somebody ask me this last year who they considered their work to be experimental. And I think they were asking about the statement of purpose in this regard. I wouldn't get experimental with the statement of purpose. It is a genre, and academia has multiple of these where certain things are, you have to get certain kinds of information in there.
Yeah.
Who are, what is your background? What is there's a kind of an origin story, if you want to think of it from a superhero
Oh,
perspective. Like, where was that moment that your artistic sensibility was born? That is, because we are looking for people who are driven and
yeah.
who really want to be here and want what we have to offer, or what is capable, what one might be capable of finding. It's not always what we're offering, but what this sort of culture and environment has to offer. And who are you reading?
Yeah.
A statement of purpose that is lacking in any awareness of literature or any seeming interest in uh, deepening their reading is suspect. But yeah, I think I would just go back to what Taylor was saying um, about sentences. There, you cannot help but demonstrate how your mind works when you write
Right.
something like that, because it's just prose and it's biographical, and you don't want to. It's one of the hardest things to do is to write about yourself and not uh, say cringeworthy things, but then
Right.
also to be too withholding, because we also need to get to know you. So how do you convey your personality? How do you convey the information you need to convey? All in a I would not use the word artsy, but you should be artful, because you should be
Yeah.
caring about the artfulness of language. That's what you're here to do. And so demonstrating where you are at this point, so uh, is imperative.
I think one of the hard things is there's usually a hard page count or word count, and you have to fit all this stuff in and make it compelling in such a short space. Is there anything that amounts to a working formula for what percentage should be about your background and what percentage should be about what you want to get out of the program, and what percentage should be about like what you hope to do with your writing career after that, and then also what you're reading?
I mean, I will say, just as a reader, when I'm reading through these things, I take the statement of purpose very seriously. After the writing sample, it's the statement of purpose because, like John said, it's our introduction. It's you introducing yourself. So we're also going, do you know how to take yourself seriously? Now, again, I don't mean to be all like earnest and doom and gloom, but feel free to make me laugh. Now, again, we're talking about and community. I'm probably not going to buy what you're selling if you have a sentence in your statement of purpose. I'm a really kind person. In nonfiction, we'd say, give me evidence. I am interested just because I'm interested in people, where people coming from, their educational background, what questions keep them up at night. I mean, I don't know that John would, this is probably unique to each reader. I wouldn't want more than a paragraph about the background, though, and I'm not really so obsessed with what's going to happen to you after our program because I'm not in control of that, and largely nor are you. I'm interested in knowing, like, are you a worker? Like, are you, I mean, sorry to use a coaching metaphor, but like, are you coachable? Like, even if the whole point of an MFA might ultimately become for you to know what you don't want to do, by which I mean, nope, that's bad advice, or I think it is. And then later, you do everything in opposition to what your teachers taught you, and you have a great career. Like, good, that was worth something. It's not, art is art, but again, I want to know someone's mature, they have a little bit of life under them, and that doesn't have to mean age wise. I mean, life can happen wherever it meets us. But yeah, this is, clarity is a helpful thing in the statement of purpose. I would suggest, don't leave us guessing about whether you play well with others, for instance.
I would hesitate to endorse any formula.
Yeah,
I think there's probably a fair amount of bad advice floating around about what should be in there or not. Because even though I'm saying don't get cute, that doesn't mean don't take risks. Like there's a because you want to convey confidence, even while you're conveying humility, as Taylor was saying. Like you must know that there are things you don't know and things that you still want to learn, or else why are you going to school?
right,
And why? And I think any program, any reader, because any teacher who's reading these, no matter where you apply, that person wants to think, here's a person who not only can I work with, as a it's not just that I want to work with, because it doesn't really work that way, where we're not choosing individual students, but we do want to have a kind of an intuitive sense that here's a person who we can work with and our students can work with. Because really, most of your learning comes from the brilliant students we have. I don't know that I teach anybody anything ultimately. We're just kind of creating the conditions
right.
for you to learn and prompting and um, but so I'd like statements of purpose that do violate a form and don't feel like, well, here's my paragraph where I talk about the faculty I want to work with, because I don't need pandered to.
Right.
And I know that you've only I want to see that you know something about the program, but you don't need to go overboard.
Mm.
Um, and I appreciate a confident statement of purpose that says, here's who I am. And here's what I'm about. Because you can't control anything. There's a weird element of fate about this whole process. Like even we don't fully understand after reading our hundreds of applications why these and not others sometimes. And I know this is one who's been through this process from the other side. Why does it work out and sometimes, and why does it not? And why here and not there? It's a mystery. And so you shouldn't feel like you can control it. What you can control is your self-presentation, and just do your best and send it out and then let go. That's
There's a follow-up in the chat to your suggestion to put what you're reading. And I guess from your end, what are you looking for, excuse me, in seeing what the applicant is reading? Are you trying to get a sense of what genre they read, that they read broadly, something else?
I think for me, it's just another way of introducing yourself. I don't know that John would do this, but I I certainly wouldn't admit you just based on what you're reading. I wouldn't reject you based on, it's just another way. It's like, you know, we can't see you. It's not like in an application I'd say, well, I'm a pint-sized Viking with red hair, but like that gives you a sense of who I am if I frame myself that way. Just like, you reading Karen Russell is different than telling me that like Moby Dick set your, spirit ablaze or something. I mean, we all read what we read, and it's just a helpful way to know further who you are and maybe what you're into. I guess that's all I can really say about it. Eh, it's not even a judgment coming from me. It's just helpful to color in. You're kind of in black and white when you apply to us, and this adds a little color to who you are.
I would just, I say this to students all the time, is I don't want anybody to do anything to please me. I mean,
Yeah.
I want to be pleased. But that's not entirely true, because I feel like part of it, I want people to try to reach a standard that would please me, but not to strategically do anything that might please me, because it's about you, and especially at this level, it's about you finding how you write a poem or what your story is. And we whenever we're learning, and we see this, you imitate, but there comes a point at which you build on that imitation to do your own thing. And that's I think primarily what we're all trying to do in our classes, and just in the ethos of the program, which encourages experimentation and cross genre work, is, find yourself and do you. And even in the statement of purpose, you know it's the default should be genuine,
Yeah.
and not to think, what does anybody want to see. And but I know that's not entirely helpful. So just in trying to answer that, I would say, just to um, mine a word that Taylor used earlier that comes up a lot in arts education, is just your obsessions.
Mhm.
Like, do you convey that you are a curious person who chases a path? Because part of what you're also doing at this point in your career is finding your lineage. Who are your forebears? And you have to read a lot, and you probably don't know, but um, in there's no reason to drop names, because you don't know who's going to read your, you
Sure.
know, so
It,
just because I don't, people, as old as I am, I'm very distant from the 25-year-olds or 23-year-olds who are reading things that people I've never heard of.
Yeah.
So don't feel like you need to drop names that you think that some old professor is going to know. I would, I mean, I genuinely learn about some writers from statements of purposes that I'll track them down. So it's an interesting process for me. So again, just do what's natural,
yeah,
and
I think
what's real. Be real.
Yeah, and I think that that's really great advice, and I think that's one of the things that makes the statement of purpose kind of tricky and feel like it's so high stakes is, we contain multitudes. We are so many things. So
Yeah.
which ones do we highlight, right? That's what people want to know, and potentially all of those things are genuine and sincere, but what do you want to know about, right? So,
I mean,
uh,
I I use the word reading a lot. I listen to a lot of audiobooks. Like, I have media in my head almost at all points in the day. So, if you're reading a lot of blogs, or, I get just as much information and stimulation from my favorite podcasts as I do reading classic literature. So don't be afraid to get in pop culture, to talk
mm,
about the movies that move you or the songs that move you. It's not all just about
Right.
conveying some sort of literary pedigree. I I
yeah,
think
that makes sense.
it just goes back to being as interesting and not filtering yourself from who you really are, and the widest range of your interests that you can convey in a short space, and not saying, well, here's just the books I read.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
no, that's great advice. Um, I just wanted to maybe ask one more question about the statement of purpose and then to move on to the writing sample. But before that,
I can take a stab at that journalism question if you like as well.
oh, sure, sure. I was
Uh,
going to ask about the signaling plays well with others.
yeah.
Since so many writers are introverts, what's a good way to signal that you play well with others?
That's good, probably come through in your reference letters. That's where it's
Mm.
revealed to us. I mean, obviously, we expect your references are going to be singing your praises. You want references are effusive. I'm sort of shocked. John's been admitting students longer than I have, but every year I can think of there's a telling detail that stands that just sort of so it's not all from you because of course you're a biased human, which we expect. We're all biased, we're ourselves. But there's just different ways to get that sensibility, and usually that comes from perspectives outside of you, which might raise the anxiety in the person who asked this question. But it is true, we're going to look to your references, and especially when we're getting down to the solid list that we're making of who we want to admit in what order, that's where some things might shift for us of what's revealed in there, good or bad. It's not all bad. Yeah, that's maybe how I would begin to think through some of that.
That's super helpful. We don't talk about the letters of recommendation very often, and so thank you for pointing that out. Um, but yeah, you're welcome to take a stab at the journalism background question.
That'll be short too. We have journalists in our program. Good writers are good writers. I mean, even if you're applying to a program that doesn't offer nonfiction like us, uh, it's what we had said, I think, earlier. It just signals to us, okay, you have a certain type of training. I don't view it as a pro or a con. It just gives me an information about you and maybe what writing you've been exposed to. But yeah, we have working journalists in our MFA program currently.
And I would just say back to that other question that it takes all kinds. We have loners,
Yep.
and but I genuinely say that it feels to me like everybody is happy and they find their place. And our the ethos of our workshops is not super competitive,
Yeah.
where um and we our students are super, and I think there are a couple of them on here if they can chime in and say that people are just really supportive of each other and we root for each other. And even in workshops, which are for always fraught because we're all raw and nobody likes to hear criticism, even if it's true. And there's just a lot of metabolizing that happens over time. But in the end, I mean, as an educator, I genuinely love my students, and I think that's all my colleagues we're that same kind of teacher, where we just whether you're a lot of people get MFAs and then they go on, and it's not that they're going to. A lot of people don't become published writers, but they still carry that experience of the MFA with them wherever into whatever part of whatever profession, whatever life they have, and the that's why I say that my kind of spiel is a master's degree is a good degree. If you can get an MFA, get one because you're obviously that's your kind of constellation of gifts
Hmm.
to develop. And it is you spend a lot of time alone as a writer,
Right.
but then we also need connection. And I think one strength of our program is that we come together, we connect, but then we also leave each other alone, and we just really uh, practice a lot of respect for the work that we do,
Yeah,
that one another does.
that's lovely. So let's talk about the writing sample. There was a question earlier on when you're submitting the writing sample, and a lot of people say the writing sample is the most important part of the application. So feel free to agree or disagree with that. But when you're submitting a writing sample, how important is it that what you present is in line with what you want to write in the program?
I will say a way I think through this, since we're talking about someone we're working with for years, I think it's kind of like when students turn in their writing to me. I'm trying to meet you where you're at and to bump you to the next level, whatever that means. Or to, if part of taking a semester with me is learning better how dialogue works in a piece, good for you. I'm not, I have the only stake I have is in developing you further now. What does that mean? Better read, more widely read, challenged in different understanding, taking risks is helpful, but I don't view that writing sample in any way as indicative of what a student will be working on while they're here. I'm trying to see, do they know how sentences work or how they could subvert my expectations? I mean, is it an interesting voice? It's like the statement of purpose. It's an introduction to you. Do you write humor? Do you write dark things? Do you write fantastical things? Um, I think I get more of a sense of that. I don't know if you agree, John, but that in the statement of purpose, if you sort of say, okay, I'm currently thinking I want to be really working a lot on short stories, but I'm interested in, hybridity or whatever, great. That just gives me a sense. But I'm seeing, like, did you take your writing sample seriously in its presentation? And that can take, that's regardless of genre. So I'm not looking and thinking, well, they made a promise that they're writing the great American novel. And then it's not like once you're here, we're like, oh, you didn't cash in on that, where, you became a nonfiction writer now. We hope you grow and evolve. And that's such a static representation of who you are. And I would pick whatever you consider best, whatever that means to you, put your best foot forward, and then we're here to take you to the next level.
Well said, Taylor.
I try. Oh, I could just feel, I mean, I'm like having hot flashes of thinking about my application days of being like, oh my God, what might they want? Uh, and I just said weird things like I want to write a book about growing up on the prairie. I mean, and it was and I wrote that book and it got published. But
I don't know what the um yeah, congratulations. It's a fantastic.
well, but it takes you,
Um,
you know.
it's I don't know what percentage of programs operate on the principle where you have to stay or have to take a certain number of classes in the genre in which you were admitted. That's not how we are. I think one of the hallmarks of our program is these are application categories just as a way to help us. But
Yes.
once you're here, we I lose track of what we admitted what genre we admitted people
Yep.
into because they just take whatever they want. And it's not that common that fiction writers become poets, but our poets become lots of other things.
Yeah.
And so the basic, as Taylor said, you should submit your best work. And before this year, we had a category of poetry and prose. And we did away with that because I've I've always felt like it kind of disadvantaged people. Because even though few people are writing their poetry and prose at the same level, in almost every case, we would say, well, the poetry is not competitive, and we'd shoot it over to the prose people. Or the prose people would say, well, let's have the poets take a look at this.
Yeah.
But then you've also submitted a shorter sample in whatever category. So we've just simplified it to poetry and prose to one, from my perspective, was to help applicants so that they wouldn't fall between the cracks and get caught in this trap of saying, well, I do both and I want to do both. Well, you can come here and do both. That's fine. But for the purposes of the application, choose the category in which you feel you're most competitive. Because it's really hard to write a good poem if you aren't really focused on writing good poems.
Right.
And so if you just as and if that's what you've been doing, then apply in poetry. But if you are just kind of dabbling in poetry, but you're focused on prose, for now, because again, there's lots of time ahead to
Yep.
keep working. But
Yep.
I think what you were saying about, like, where are you right now? don't try to be anything other than what present who you are right now. That's the static snapshot, as Taylor said.
That might just be another thing that's so helpful, what you're saying, John, to indicate in your statement of purpose. I mean, just a quick thing of I'm, I'm more confident in my fiction. I have been starting to dabble in poetry. That's why your program appeals to me. It's again, we don't admit you, and then God help you, you only study nonfiction with Taylor Brorby your whole time here. You get to
God
play.
help you indeed.
Hope that'll we hope that'll spill over. Taking a poetry class with John helps your prose in my classes. And so we think of that as so symbiotic, but it is really true. Again, to think we're getting this one glance at you, you want to take your shot. So don't think that, well, if I spread it out, like John said, those applications they've suffered, because people think more is better, and it's like better is better, whatever better is for you.
So if you were to put together, if you were to help someone put together a writing sample, what types of things might you look for to make it stand out, either in poetry or prose, both ideally, if you can speak to that?
You're the writer. You never. It's the best writing in there. I don't.
Yeah.
I don't know how I would help someone.
Well, if you were the writer, and you have insight knowledge on what they're looking for, what would that thing be that would make your writing stand out?
I think it's hard to overemphasize this. What does this mean? Voice. I mean, it's like when I go to a bookstore, you read that first page. I mean, I think of before it became a movie, The Power of the Dog, with Benedict Cumberbatch. That was a novel that only like Annie Prue and I had read, because no one, it came out, decades ago. That first page begins with a bull castration scene, and I'm like, how can you not stop reading that? It's like you have to keep going. It got my attention. It's what Margaret Atwood says, hold my attention. And that's what I'm reading for. Like, if all of a sudden I find reading doesn't just mean fast reading, like a propulsive narrative. I might really say in our discussions of our applicants, that one page, that's where like my water divining rod goes off, and I saw what's possible. Because that's normally what I'm doing with our students here. I'll go, you've given me 3 really fantastic paragraphs, which was revealed to me you can meet that level of writing. Now, the hard thing is the rest of your writing has to come up to those really great ones. So it's voice. It's again, avoiding cliches, those simple like go to Hallmark and read their cards. Don't do that. Do something better.
And I was just thinking of the last thing I read this week was Train Dreams came out on Netflix, and I had not read the novella by Dennis Johnson. And so I went back and did it. And it was, I have lots of words for it, but it mostly left me speechless.
Yeah.
And it's a novella, not a novel. So it's just, I'm using that as the analogy that even though you're allowed to put in 30 pages of prose in an application, if you feel like your 20 is strong, don't pad it.
Yeah.
And because that, I don't know, I'm watching the movie now, and I can barely, it so doesn't live up to what Dennis Johnson is up to in that, in the prose.
It never does it?
Sometimes it does. Yesterday, I also, well, I guess this wasn't a novel, but I mean, I sat through all of Kill Bill, the whole bloody affair yesterday. One of the most fantastic art experiences I've ever had. But that's just a different thing. So,
I mean, to John's point, I would say at least on the prose side, the discussions we have is, again, more isn't always better. You might have one really great story that you want to submit, or one really great essay that's 17 to 20 pages or whatever. Submit that. I'm not even always looking for what's the range of what they've written. Again, it comes back to that thing of what is your best writing. And once you reach that limit of what that is, more is just filler after a while.
Do you do you prefer to see lots of short stories versus a novel excerpt for prose? And if the quality was equal, would one?
No, no, no. I have no preference that way in my reading of. I would say the only risk you want to think about with your novel excerpt is like I would definitely take like a footnote opportunity, like probably starting at the beginning as your best chance rather than summarizing too much in the plot. I mean, if I picked up a 300-page novel and cracked it open to chapter 9, there's going to be a lot of questions in my head, and that might not be helpful for it. I mean, I would say a good recommendation is have a friend read your writing sample and get a little feedback that way, because I know it can be so fraught during this time, but even just asking a simple thing of a friend of, did that make sense? Is really helpful.
Yeah.
But I would argue if somebody were to ask me for advice and I were to give it, you have more opportunity to show what you're capable of with a short story than a novel excerpt.
Yeah.
Because it's just it's a passage, but a short story, you have to show how you're beginning something, how you develop something, and endings are hard. How
Yep.
do you end it?
Yep.
And it's readable, and it doesn't require a synopsis or
Right.
um,
On
and
the
even if it's been again given enough time, if somebody were to say, "Well, I've just been working on novels," well, I would I don't. It's not always good advice to write something from scratch for the application.
Right.
That might be good advice or just to be wary of your tendency to do that because the pressure can be distorting, I
Sure.
think. But I would almost recommend to someone to go back and if you have a short story, to work on revising it and polishing it, taking all the skills that you've learned while writing novels for the last year, apply it to the short story. Because I think you can just present a fuller picture of what you're capable of to a reader who is reading hundreds. It's a competitive environment.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's also hard to work on a novel in an MFA program. We have people writing novels for their theses, but that's after 3 years of doing other things. So it also, it, it- you just can show off more.
Right.
So you can show more of what you're capable of in shorter pieces in the application environment. Nothing against your novel.
Yeah. And on the poetry side of things, do you like to see some formal poetry thrown in there? Does that show any sort of well-roundedness or attention to craft, or do you not give any weight to that?
I mean, I like it all if it's good.
Mhm.
It's risky because it's harder to write a good poem in strict form. But if you stick the landing,
Yeah.
I'm and I'm all for it. And oftentimes, what I'm looking for is range, ambition, even failure. But if the failure, you can just see when somebody's pressuring the language in a way that says they can do this thing. And even
Yeah.
if the poems aren't all working, I mean, you have to write a lot of poems before you start writing good poems. So I understand. I'm sympathetic.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I've
Thank
really
you, everyone.
appreciated spending this time during both sessions. I think that we covered so much, and I hope that was helpful to everybody at home. Um, Good luck with reading through the next round of
Thank you.
applicants.
And again, if anyone, you can write me, jestis@ua.edu. I'm the director of the program, so I get all these emails. If you have follow-up questions or something more specific or something that wasn't brought up, feel free to write me, and I will write you back.
That's lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you, John.
Yep.
Thank you, Taylor.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, guys. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.
Care.